Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are as you're tuning in today. I'm Wally Yosafat, the CIO of Vibrant Emotional Health, as well as the an Avasant Fellow. And we're here today on a very important and exciting subject with a great group of panelists to talk about the subject of hybrid cloud. To kind of introduce the subject and discussion, technology, product and service providers are going all in on hybrid cloud. But developing a hybrid cloud architecture, not a one is a single or multiple the preferred objective. And should on-premise data centers or managed services also be part of the future state and vision? So we will get into all that. We'll get into hybrid cloud migration paths and scaling and expansion. And we'll hear from our distinguished panelists on their experiences in building and maintaining hybrid clouds environments, the criteria for deciding where and how applications should be deployed, and the challenges in the journey to hybrid cloud success. I would like to introduce our wonderful panel today, and I'm going to start with Randi Levin, and we'll move from there. Randi.
Hi, Wally. My name is Randi Levin, and I'm the CIO of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I'm also an Avasant Fellow and very excited to be here. I've had a 35-plus year career in IT, starting with programming on the Apache helicopter, which is still flying today. I was the CIO for the city of Los Angeles for 5 years, and I did the first Gmail implementation of an enterprise in this country, in this world. So I love the cloud. You may know JPL now as the organization that landed on Mars recently in February, the Perseverance, and then with the helicopter Ingenuity. And again, thank you for having me.
Randi, thanks. Stan.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Stan Kreydin. I currently am the Chief Technology Officer and the Chief Information Security Officer for Travel and Leisure Company. Travel and Leisure Company is the world's largest leading membership and leisure travel company with a portfolio of nearly 20 resort, travel club, and lifestyle travel brands. I've been doing and operating and deploying and supporting cloud workloads back since the Terramark early days when cloud wasn't as popular, cool, or well understood, all the way through deploying and managing workloads across on-prem, off-prem, and various multimodal models, both at Travel and Leisure and at Wyndham Worldwide, previous to having this role. Very, very happy to be here, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. Great to have you with us. And Shawn, please introduce yourself.
Awesome. Great. And happy to be here and great to be talking with these awesome panelists. I think we're going to have a good discussion today. So again, I'm Shawn Kingsberry. I'm the Vice President for Unisys, leading advisory services, which supports, the Americas plus provides insight for our global presence to help customers understand how to transform. Right. Background is I'm a former federal CIO and CTO, 17 years USDA Forest Service, 5 years as the CIO for the Recovery, Accountability, and Transparency Board. So I have insight moving the first federal-wide system to the public cloud and understand the differences and challenges between meeting regulatory compliance requirements of whether it be commercial or federal or public sector, from on-prem services to cloud services. So I'm very excited for today's conversation.
Great. And Shawn, thanks to you. Thanks to Unisys for co-sponsoring with Avasant today's session. It's wonderful to be here. So I want to kick off with a few thoughts and words, and then I want to jump right into challenging the three of you and your expertise in weighing in on important topics related to hybrid cloud. You all know, as I do and the rest of the world, the pandemic and the information security threat elevation, it's created a greater need to produce work from everywhere. Right? and doing so in a way that handles greater security challenges, complexity, and handling the needs for business continuity and disaster recovery. All of you, I'm sure, have seen, like I have, many jobs have been lost over the last year, plus a lot of technology spend has occurred to enable the remote workforce and increase technology workloads. We need only look to the world of online and touchless ordering and pickup for retailers and restaurants, healthcare, the development of the vaccinations, the increase in telehealth. We look at the remote-based delivery of education and schooling to the masses, delivering quality into the home and everywhere else outside your traditional classrooms, automated data centers, and remote operations, and thus cloud migrations, digital transformations, you name it. And as enterprises shift rapidly to cloud in a hybrid work from anywhere type of environment, the different solution sets offer increased functionality, but also with increased complexity and things to handle. So with all that as a mouthful, I want to pose a question to you, and we'll start with you, Shawn, and make our way to Randy and to Stan in this first question. Digital transformation, cloud migrations, getting the environment spend effective and efficient, let's call it tuning, seem to remain as key business initiatives and drives to deliver a better customer experience and enable companies to remain competitive. From your experiences and building, delivering, looking at single cloud, hybrid cloud, can you comment on how you're handling these decisions, these plans, these agreements, these deliveries with your boards, your advisory boards, your senior management team and shareholders? Shawn, let's start with you.
Sure. So, so you hit a lot of very key topics in this discussion. So, first, it's clear, and I think the industry and the market has matured to understand that there is no silver bullet. Right? There's no one size fits all. There's no silver bullet. And the key is business drives technology while technology enables business to meet its goals and objectives. So first is to understand the different business requirements that have to be met. And what we see in many cases is it really starts with the types of regulatory compliance that has to be met, because that directly connects to the business. We all say we want to make sure we drive business outcomes and the likes, but in many cases, that actually starts with the compliance requirements of the services that have to be delivered, which means, you really need to go through categorization of the services to come up with the appropriate controls and let that drive the architecture and let that drive the in-state architecture if it's going to be some workloads may stay in a private cloud on-prem. Others may work between multiple clouds, right? And in many cases, you aren't going to live in just one public cloud either. It'll be multiple public clouds, but the goal is to really use a business-driven approach to get there. So start with strategic goals and objectives and map those strategic goals and objectives to the requirements. So it really goes through a systematic approach of discover, analyze, strategize, plan, transition, transform to build this out to meet those requirements.
Great. Shawn, thanks. Randy, what are your thoughts?
Well, you also had quite a breadth of everything that you had mentioned. And so this has been a challenging year, and I think it's going to be another challenging year for all of us coming up. This pandemic has really highlighted we would say we want to do mobile first and, work anywhere, but we really hadn't implemented work anywhere, for the most part. And so I think that this whole pandemic has illustrated that this is here to stay. And so what kind of technologies can we use to make our workforces productive during the pandemic? And now what is it going to look like in the post-pandemic world? We had to be very, very productive the minute we told people that they needed to work from home, because we couldn't miss our launch window you miss your launch window to Mars, it's another over 2.5 years before you can do it again, and billions of dollars on the line. So it was a time that we were actually able to start prototyping some other technologies. And given this opportunity that I don't necessarily think we would have had otherwise. So we've been looking at AR, VR. We have some pilots going with that around, video conferencing, collaborative engineering. How can you do engineering designs, all of that architecture when people are remote, and we had people on our lab. When you saw our landing, you only saw 30 or 40 people in that room, but there was a cast of many hundreds, if not thousands of others that were home doing all their monitoring and all of the other things that they were doing for the actual landing. And so, I think that, we don't have a board, but we do have a board, and we have Caltech who we report to. And so, in talking to our lab director, it's really interesting now because I think, people are open to a lot more different work styles, different technologies. And so that changes, I think, the nature of our strategic plan, not just mine, but the panelists here and others, in terms of now what's a priority and how are you going to get that kind of ubiquitous interaction, no matter if you're sitting across the table or if you're sitting on a Zoom call.
Great. Randi, thank you so much. Stan, the world for you and me, right, when we last worked together, has changed dramatically. So I'd love your thoughts in what is now, from the travel and leisure perspective, on the work with the management team, the boards, et cetera.
Yeah, so great. This great topic to kick off with, right? Certainly a very meaty one, right? So I think I'd look at it from two different ways, right? One, there's the associate, employee, consultant experience, right? The end user, right? Consuming our services, right? Our customers, right? They have a certain set of expectations. Granted, with COVID, certainly those expectations were tuned in depending on kind of where they were. But they have a certain expectation to receive a certain service for a certain price or a certain experience based on where they are and what they do. So our challenge was twofold. We had to maintain velocity on the associate experience and the customer experience while going through this massive, unparalleled, massively impactful event, specifically on the hospitality industry, while also maintaining and understanding how we're going to maintain our resorts, what schedules are we going to be open or closing in, how are we focusing on health and safety, and how are we aggressively pursuing the strategy we had pre-COVID, right? I think we'll all agree strategy pretty much went out the window, right, over the past year, and we went into tactical mode, right? Some of those tactics accelerated digital strategy imperatives, where we looked at the desired outcomes that used to span 3-4 years that we're now thinking in quarterly or in some cases monthly increments, right? Because the goalposts have changed. In many cases, the games have changed. So from our side of the house, right, we looked at things like where can we accelerate that we can embed continued velocity on some of the transformation efforts we had coming in to the environment, right? So think about focusing on mapping application workload, for example, and understanding, I think it was mentioned earlier by Shawn, data sovereignty and compliance requirements, right? We still have to maintain and provide services to our customers, regardless of whatever state we were exposed to, over the course of last year and arguing into this year, but also maintain velocity on a lot of the project work, because we knew and we were confident, and the current market is bearing it out, leisure travel would be very, very quick to rebound. So not only were we working on the execution on the initiatives of maintaining our security posture and continuing with our cloud migrations and continuing all the other things that we had to do as a company, but we're also leveraging and understanding how do we then prepare for the return. So that is making sure that our workforce kind of shifted from an office-based culture to basically a perimeter-based culture, and almost a work from anywhere, although folks are hesitant to call it that, but have the technology assets for that. So we look at things like understanding what your digital identity management strategy is, again, both for your associate and your customer, right? How does that marry to what you run with on-premise workloads versus cloud-based workloads? And then how do we create that kind of seamless journey such that I can show up to work from my living room or my den, do my job. The customer can book their vacation, in some cases, cancel their vacation, modify their vacation, and kind of continue along that journey. For us, that's where some of the pivot points were. And it's really really leveraging a lot of the momentum, which thankfully we had a lot going in from a pandemic point of view, to focus on some of those key pillars, right? It's around customer data, customer journey, digital identity management, and kind of where we're going, marrying the associate experience along with the consumer experience, which continues on today. And then also driving that cloud transformation approach. And not every workload is going to sit in the cloud, right? There's cost, there's data sovereignty, there's practical implications of it. But the prep work to figure out where do you do a lift and shift versus a move and improve, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit later, for us is where we're kind of really laser focusing now as we come out of this pandemic, continue to come out of this pandemic, and again, respond to the scale that our customers are really demanding we provide in order for them to really start driving the pent up demand we have from a vacation experience point of view.
Stan, it's great. It's so interesting to see how it's evolved, right? And how the pandemic has not only impacted you guys, right, but impacted Randy and what you talked about in pushback missile, and Shawn areas. Shawn, I know something Randy said. Before I jump to the next question, let me give you that opportunity.
Well, it's a couple of things to me that really resonated with what Randy and Stan said, and it directly connects into when you start to look at hybrid cloud, right? So, we are moving into there. This is a new norm. We're not going to go back to where we were before the pandemic, and that's not a bad thing, because with risk there's opportunity. With opportunity there's innovation, and in many cases, we get stuck into the strategy that we've developed and execute, build the plan, execute the plan, right? But it's interesting because when a fire happens and we all react to a fire, it forces you to think outside the box. And when you do that, magical things happen. And now, but the interesting thing is Pandora's box has been opened. So now there's a different set of expectations of customers, whether it be citizens. There's a different set of expectations of employees and the like. And it's something interesting that I'm seeing now. And we have several conversations now. And this very short story kind of connects into hybrid cloud and the needs of what we're seeing that's turning into the new norm. Something interesting that citizens saw, right? Meaning with the pandemic, you had $150 billion that was pushed into the economy that had to flow to, create jobs, benefits, and the likes throughout this situation. Now, interesting thing is government offices had to be closed. So government offices were closed, but yet you had $150 billion that had to flow through the system, and, citizens expect to be able to get relief. Interesting thing is the money flew through the system. The government offices were closed, and citizens didn't have to go into an office to actually go through benefits and get what they get to get relief. So now there's this new expectation that I don't expect to have to go stand in a line if I don't have to now. Now the expectation is, we always talked about digital government and citizens experience in the moment of truth and all of that. But now and we say that, to interact with corporations and interact with government, the expectation is it should be like I'm interacting with Netflix or what have you. Now it becomes interesting because now the citizen expects that they're going to have that digital experience from this point forward, and it's going to be easy, and I shouldn't have to log in and out of different systems to get the benefit realization. So what's this expectation is similar to what Stan said. Now it's this view of I got to have identity and access management, single sign-on to be able to log in securely and be verified to get these digital services and have hybrid cloud services in play that now the customer doesn't care what cloud it's coming from. All they care about is the business, the service, they're getting their benefit realization, and that moment of truth of where the intersection of the consumption of the services to actually benefit from them is seamless. That is now the new expectation moving forward, that's going to work. It's going to work at scale, and it's going to be secure. And on the back end, to make that happen, it's going to be workloads running on-prem, workloads running across multiple clouds, leveraging as a service, APIs, meaning serverless computing, making a lot of this happen. It gets more complex. regulatory compliance gets interesting, system boundaries get to be interesting, because now it's different, right? It's a different approach. But I mean, I just think that's an applicable conversation right now, because that's what the world is faced with.
Yeah, you used a phrase. I'll coin it and give you the credit, right? Combined, we've opened up pandemic's box, not just Pandora's box, right? And
Okay.
take a look at the different expectations that have been set with the customer, right? The user, the experience, based on the fact of this box has been opened for us, whether we opened it or not, right? Et cetera. So, Shawn, I'll give the whole panel here credit for that one. That's not mine. I'm going to move us on and start with Randi on this one. If you can comment, Randi, what are the key drivers that you have in looking at the scaling of hybrid cloud solutions? In other words, moving more and more workloads to the cloud and integrating a hybrid cloud situation into the enterprise, and thinking about the fact of, with the different solution sets that are out there, we're going to have multiple clouds, right? I don't know of anybody who I've talked to that says, they're on a singular cloud for everything. But I'd love to know from your perspective, starting Randi, and then to Stan and to Shawn, give me what those key drivers are for deciding how and when and scaling and leveraging the hybrid cloud situation.
Well, JPL and NASA are very big cloud users, because you can imagine how much science data is coming down from space, and there's no way that could all be stored on-prem. So we have been heavy in the cloud, but not leveraging as much a hybrid cloud solution. We've really started on that this past year, before the pandemic. But we're in the middle actually of developing our whole hybrid cloud strategy, because it depends on the type of data that we have. I mean, that's really the driving factor and who needs to access it. Science data is available to the entire world. So, that's a different use case than some other data that we might have for our missions that are in engineering that need to be either classified or under different, areas of FISMA or FITARA, or all the cybersecurity things that we need to abide by from DHS. So I think, the regulations are driving which cloud. And, what I tell, the lab is that all clouds are not created equal. And so we're developing our cloud consulting expertise so that we can actually go out and work with our various missions, our various customers, and advise them on what's going to be the right cloud based on their requirements, is going to be the most economical for them. And it might be on-prem. It may be that it isn't, in one of the clouds. But we're certainly looking at shifting more to the cloud and developing this criteria that we can then use to help in this consultative manner.
That's fascinating, right? That this is where you are on your strategy and on your journey to the cloud. Stan, travel and leisure, as you guys think about what goes into, what are those drivers, and the use of the mix of the cloud components in a hybrid environment?
Yeah, it's again it's a charged topic depending on when and who you talk to about this, right? Whether it's a CFO-led conversation or a digital executive-led conversation, right? So, first thing we look at is what's our desired outcome, right? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to drive? Are we trying to drive velocity? Are we trying to drive innovation? Are we trying to drive being closer to the customer, delivering more from an edge-based conversation? Are we trying to rapidly innovate and scale into something that we'd never build by ourselves, for example, right? I mean, I think, the adage is true. It's very few people run on one cloud environment. If you look at the various modes we have, if you're using O365 at Amazon, but guess what? You're multi-cloud, right? So we ultimately take a look at the desired outcome, right? And that almost invariably always goes into, all right, what's the return? What's the cost structure? What are we looking at from a longevity and from a sustainability point of view? And that then helps us build a case. And that case is largely predicated on taking a look at the application flow, understanding which elements can be refactored, which ones have to be moved, right? Where we have practical impediments like licensing, right? I mean, I think we've all worked with vendors and service providers whose licensing is in some cases deliberately complex enough to discourage cloud utilization in the open market, right? So we have to look at that. And in some cases, you have to take preparatory steps, right? Shifting off of a certain platform onto a more open source platform that's probably a bit more cloud friendly as an example. And that may take time. We also take a look at the integration challenges, right? We talked a little bit earlier. Shawn mentioned that, from an API point of view, I think if you're cloud native or cloud first, which, in our business, that's just not what we're in, given our heritage and where we've come from. You have to take a look at marrying outside cloud-based native API platforms versus internal-based API platforms, because you have to marry the workflow, whether it's data, whether it's transactional flow, in order such that the transaction is economical, it's secure, it's reliable, and it ultimately gives the consumer what they want, whether that's a customer or one of our end users. So we take a look at how will that application interoperate with the various modes that it runs, right? We've got a certain cloud provider from identity access management, we've got another CRM provider, we've got on-prem platforms, we have, customer data platforms that are out there. So there's all this data and all these transactions, funnel, and flows. We want to make sure that it's as optimized as possible. Cost obviously comes into consideration, right? I mean, I think everybody, regardless of public, private sector, or where they are, right? Cost is a factor, right? Issues and mistakes tend to scale very poorly in a multi-cloud environment because they're very costly mistakes, and they're mistakes you can't really get back. So we spend quite a bit of time taking a look at the cost structure, again, both one time and also the recurring stuff as well, right? And kind of how we account for that. The other piece, and this is really, really kind of important, is, looking at your partner ecosystem, right? We don't rely on any one vendor to provide us products and services, right? From an application development point of view, from an infrastructure support point of view, from a security point of view. How do you pull all those together such that you have visibility, you have governance, and you have sustainability, such that you understand how and where your various applications, and we have lots and lots of applications, how they flow through the tool chain and how are they delivered and deployed in a way that, again, is sustainable and it's aligned. And it gives the business, what they want. And yeah, moving into a cloud isn't a foregone conclusion, just like sitting all on-prem isn't a foregone conclusion. You really have to look at kind of that outcome, which is where we start.
Great, Stan. Thank you. Shawn.
Oh man, it was a lot of good stuff between Stan and Randy. So in my mind, it starts with where you are in your journey first, right? Because everybody's at different places, and based on that, what's the business requirement you're trying to actually address? Meaning, is this a one-off application that you're trying to address, like Randy described, right? Like when you look at some of the big data analytics, with the data that you get from the Mars mission, and how I remember when you all did that the first time through AWS back, I want to say 2009, 2010, because I was on another panel with NASA and team talking about that, and how that, that was kind of stepping outside the box, right? Where you said, well, we don't have to buy a bunch of hardware. We're going to go ahead and use the elasticity of the cloud, spin up the systems, collect the data, pull the data down, shut down the systems, keep it going, and manage our cost. So it's one of these situations where you say, it's the business requirement first, right, of what you're trying to solve. But then you start to get into, okay, is this an enterprise solution where you say across the company or across the government or across the agency as a whole, I know I have to address K through 12 and higher ed, and I have to address law enforcement, and I have to address social services, and all of them have different regulatory requirements and different types of, I have to meet my FISMA requirements. I have to take each one of these systems through the risk management framework and comply. And in some cases, it could be DoD compliant requirements where you have to meet DoD IL 4, 5, 6 requirements. And now you say, okay, if I have to actually connect to all of these, and I have to have an enterprise approach to support all of these different lines of business and business applications, then in essence, I need to have a strategy of how I'm going to do this across the board. That's why I say it's different if we're saying, if the business requirement is I have a specific application that I need to address, like Randy, or I have to support multiple business areas, and this is going to be an ongoing deal. And now I need to have to put together an enterprise approach of how I'm going to manage and connect to, like Stan said, I got M365. So now that automatically puts me into a hybrid cloud environment, and I'm going to have workloads in Azure, AWS. And like Stan said, in some cases, some cloud providers have models from a licensing perspective that forces you down a certain path, like Oracle. And I'm not going to say that's bad either, because what Oracle gives you is different SLAs that you don't get with AWS and Azure. So that's why it's not a one size that fits all. But if you're going to manage it at an enterprise level and deliver these types of services, and if the question is management and how do I deal with this from a hybrid cloud perspective, a lot of these variables become very important when you get into spinning up new systems across multiple environments to drive down my costs so I don't have to have specialists in each cloud environment. Charge back, show back, so I can now manage all of my cloud spend across on-prem and multiple cloud environments, irrespective of what the cloud environment is, while having governance and workflows that can segregate who has access to do, see what throughout the different environments. So you can start to push down some of the management to different areas, because every company, every government agency or what have you isn't necessarily consolidated IT. You may have to have distributed access and distributed roles. So now you can empower people to work within their culture. So that gets into that last piece, culture, right? Culture plays a big role. It's my cheese. You're not moving my cheese, right? Technology typically isn't the problem in any of this. It's really the people and the culture and who's willing to do what. And when you start to see the change, now the evangelists and people that can communicate to start to get people on the same page, to start to think differently and make sure that you can come up with what's in it for me into this. And that's something that I think is missed from a lot of these types of conversations. Technology is not the hard problem. It's funny. I look at my son, right? He's super smart, codes in 6 languages. And I say, I could put him on several of my projects and we will get some interesting things done. If you get highly technical, highly experienced, highly competent people to work on any project, technically you can get it done, right? You put a bunch of smart people on a project, you can get it done. But in most cases, that's not going to be what causes you to move the needle. It's the people. You have to be able to address the people and the culture in parallel, and it's equally, if not more important, to move the needle forward.
Shawn, it's a note for Avasant. We'll have to get your son on the panel with you. That'll be a great discussion. What I took away from what the 3 of you talked about is very interesting, some trends, right? The drivers are data and outcomes. Drivers remain cost, and the drivers remain people and cultures, and what your history is, the adaptability to change, all these pieces and components. And it's a great segue to my next question, and this will be our last question, and then I will give you guys the opportunity to after that share your thoughts, what I didn't ask about, how you'd like to comment on today's subject. But my last question for you, and Stan, we'll go to you. We'll go to Randy after that, and then Shawn, you can wrap us up on this one. I would love your thoughts on the mix of internal work and leadership of these initiatives versus outsourcing, offshoring. And I've been on both sides of the equation in my career, being on the outsourced provider side and taking advantage of outsource and offshore providers. So Stan, love your thought, especially for all 3 of you, is you've had to experience, I know, over the last year, having to let people go, reduce costs, that type of stuff. When we think about hybrid cloud and so forth, what's your take on the mix of building the internal team and talent and taking advantage of the outsourcers?
Yeah, so we're typically our approach really is try to insulate the intellectual property and keep that in-house, right? I mean, you want to call that retain the brain, that's I know folks refer to that quite often, right? But we tend to keep a lot of our innovation, at least that is closely tied to the business, in-house, because our business particularly is fairly complex. In certain sections, more complex than others. And bringing in a third party, by the time you get them ramped up to some of the inherent complexity, that some of it's regulatory, some of it's, just the way we operate as a business, some of it's just our heritage and the way we operate. There tends to be some impediments. Now, that said, right, there are other silos, whether they be highly specialized, that we absolutely look to bring on outside folks to help us innovate and scale up, right? I think it's largely situational based. There's some digital areas that, we just bring some folks in, say, here's kind of the problems we're trying to solve, a lot of ideation sessions, lots of great remote tech out there, even pre-pandemic. And then we leverage more of a kind of a plan, build, run model for some cases where you farm it out to multi-sources, right? Things that can grow at scale, at cost, right? Whether it's, the locations really don't matter anymore, right? To say onshore, offshore, it doesn't really matter because everybody's somewhere else, at least until we all kind of come back, right? But we tend to use partners to grow and scale because that is really hard. You're never going to be able to hire and get everybody onboarded and ramped up, especially around common technologies. And when you're talking about cloud, a lot of these technologies, once you layer and abstract away a lot of the business complexity that you have, which is where a lot of the challenges, quite frankly, are internally, right? You want to start leveraging a lot of that commoditized talent, right? That's not a bad thing, right? Commoditization, people think, oh, it's bad. It's commoditization. It's not a bad thing. It allows you to grow and scale at a rapid rate in an elastic fashion for a period of time, right? Now, the question for us, and we, I don't think anybody's quite perfected this model, right? For us, it's a model of how do you grow from the scale up, build out model into something that is sustainable and cost aligned, right? Because once you deploy, change, do something, right, just to keep it at a macro level, that you always want to make sure you're obviously optimizing, you're managing, you're monitoring, you're enhancing, you're doing all the stuff on the run side of the house. But that's where you start understanding how to have margin preservation, making sure you've got enough of a pivot then to focus on the next thing or the next 5 things, or the next 10 things, depending on what the business model is, right? So, we don't really have one particular model, right? But typically we like to, have our really business knowledge folks inside and then leverage third parties. Again, in some cases like security, for example, right? There's a lot of really, really smart siloed purpose-built companies out there that are boutique in nature. And some of them are some of the larger players, right? We're not going to learn those things in the time that we need to effectuate change. So we're going to partner with them. But during that journey, I'm going to make darn sure I have an exit strategy such that I'm not depending on some of these service providers, because from a cost and from a culture point of view, it's hard to inculcate kind of a cultural longevity and a culture of sustainability when you don't have an identity and kind of how that team operates. And that's a huge thing for me going forward, to be able to have that kind of inculcate back into the overall culture of the company.
Great, Stan, thanks. Randy and Shawn, we have just a couple minutes left before we need to get to wrap up. So Randy, give us your quick take, and then Shawn will want the same, and then we'll get into wrap up. The view on internal talent and leadership development versus outsourcing and partnering with the vendors.
Well, I agree with what Stan said. The intellectual property is the aspect that we want to keep. We want to, like, as I had mentioned, we're developing our internal consulting capabilities so that we can work with our missions more effectively, on the various clouds, and not just through the selection of the cloud, but through the actual implementation. And then we do use third-party providers for potentially implementation, building systems, things of that nature. And JPL is also very complicated, and it's hard to plop somebody down and have them be effective 2 weeks later. It really takes quite some time. So, retaining that expertise is critical.
Great. Thank you. Shawn, give me your best 90-second answer to this one, my friend.
I think it's culture, right? And I'm kind of taking this back to when I was a CIO. It was great listening to Stan and Randy's feedback, where, I'll give a specific use case. So if you look at the government, right, like federal government, 50% of the federal government is eligible to retire as of last year. 30% of public sector is eligible to retire as of last year. And now you start to say, hey, I want to be innovative. I want to drive things. I want to do things different, right? That requires a partner to come in. So I literally made sure I brought in partners to help. Now you have different constraints based on culture and regulatory requirements. If it's government, you can't, if you have to be NIST compliant, you can't have any people that aren't within the contiguous US and what have you, if you're going to meet the NIST requirements. So you can have outsourced, but not out the country, right? So you start to, funnel that down. Now, I think it's critical to have a key team, and the resume of the people inside the company and inside the government needs to change, because they have to be able to be powered up. It can't be expected that I just know it all, because I got to tell you now, that was several people that worked for me when I was on the government side, and they didn't. And we had to get to that point to get them to understand that we have to be able to bring in mind share that understands things. You understand culture, you understand our business, combine that together, build a solution, get it done. And if the culture is transition over and deliver, you do that. If the culture is embed people into the team and the organization to move forward, you do that. But the goal is to do something and have a model that enables the business from a strategy perspective to continue to move the needle forward, deliver the business requirements, execute the strategy while maturing, right? Because if you don't mature and you can't say, this is where we were and this is where we are and this is where we're going, and you don't have any way in place to measure that progression, right? What good are you doing, right? And that's kind of what I could say, at least what we've been doing. We've had the opportunity to work in all of those types of models, right? In some cases, we'll come in and we'll be the partner to do the commodity. In other cases, we're there to do the strategy. In other cases, we're there to build it and transition. I think there's no one size that fits all, but you got to be able to, address the different types of cultures, because I still say it comes back to the culture.
That's great. I'm going to wrap up real quickly. First of all, with thanks. This is, again, a privilege and an honor for me to be with people who I've just met and people who I've known for a while. It's amazing to me that the three of you, right, who probably haven't been together, are able to come together, right, and almost finish each other's sentences, right? It's as if the three of you have worked together to make great things happen. And so I look forward to pulling us together again in the future. And you guys have the right drivers. You're focused on the right things, and you're sharp people who know how to use internal talent and leverage external. So thank you so much for being on. Randi, Stan, Shawn in particular, to you and Unisys for co-sponsoring with us. And I look forward to our next encounter together and being able to continue doing great things and sharing great thoughts with people on not just hybrid cloud, but security and other components. Thank you all so very, very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great stuff.
Appreciate it.